Hello everyone. I'd like to talk to you in this session about the People's Palace, which is down on Glasgow Green, and I'm sure many of you will have visited and many of you will know. And there's the wonderful building, red sandstone, beautiful building at the front, lovely statues and stonework, and to the rear, the Winter Gardens, or the Hot House, as it was probably better known. Okay, the People's Palace has got a very interesting history insofar as how did it get to be there? Well, there was always a feeling that Glasgow, particularly the east end of Glasgow, needed something as a focal point, and it was decided that it should try and build a People's Palace. The money for it came firstly in 1866, where the authorities sold off a bleaching green and got a sum of money. In 1891, there was the East End Industrial Exhibition, which ran up at Denniston, and that was another source of revenue. And maybe one of the most important sources of revenue came from the Caledonian Railway Company, because at one time the railway company wanted to run a line right across Glasgow Green on the surface. And thank goodness that the city fathers at the time said, no, you can't do that. But what we will let you do is we'll let you tunnel. And that's exactly what they did. And the current Argyll line runs under the ground, just to the north of Glasgow Green at Monteith Row. And the other lump of money to complete the project came from Glasgow Corporation itself. Here's a poster showing the East End Exhibition Halls, which was up in Duke Street, and this was a former boys' home. It was a place where boys were kept residentially, and it was then converted to become a venue, and it was the industrial exhibition that provided the money, or some of the money, that went towards the building of the People's Palace. Here we see the opening of the People's Palace on the inside at the Winter Garden, and it's a very regal affair. You can see the Lord Provost sitting centre there on the dais, and surrounded by all the council dignitaries and others. And in attendance is a very large crowd enjoying this historic moment. The People's Palace was designed under the auspices of the city engineer, a man called Alexander Beath MacDonald, A.B. MacDonald, and he used the services of an architect, William B. Whitey, to work on the project with him. And Whitey also was the architect who designed the Mitchell Library at Charing Cross. The People's Palace officially opened on the 22nd of January in 1898, and the opening ceremony was performed by Lord Rosebery. It was built in a French Renaissance style. It's spread over 3 floors, and to the rear is the glass-encased Winter Garden. The Winter Garden was a popular venue for musical concerts, and the photo on the right, you can see there's a concert well in progress, with the band on the stage at the front, at the bottom of the photograph. And you can also see the palm trees inside the Winter Gardens, the hot house, and a massive crowd enjoying the music. And it appears that many of them appear to be men wearing bonnets. I don't see many women in the photograph. On the left is a poster advertising a forthcoming concert to be held in the Winter Gardens on the 4th of February in 1899, and it would be the Glasgow Corporation Police Band. And the following week, it was going to be the Band of the Royal Scots. So these musical concerts were very popular in the Glasgow parks. Many of the concerts were held outdoors in the bandstands, but in the winter weather, they would decant into places like the Winter Gardens at the People's Palace. This is one of the earliest photographs of the People's Palace. You can see that the whole thing hasn't changed all that much. The frontage is slightly different now. There's a lot of paving to the front, but you can see the main building and the Winter Garden to the rear. Now to some of the exhibits, some of the things that you might see in the People's Palace. This is a photograph of a man called John Glassford and his family. And John Glassford was one of the so-called tobacco lords, and he traded with the Americas and brought cotton and tobacco back into the city. And the photograph's a very big painting. If you go to the People's Palace and see it, it's quite a size. And you might not make it out, but just on the extreme left of the photograph, just over John Glassford's right shoulder, in the corner, there's the outline of a Negro manservant who's standing against the wall on that side. And the remainder is of John Glassford and his family, all seeming to be living quite a nice lifestyle. This is the main staircase in the People's Palace, looking from the half landing back to the front door where you would go in. And the thing that's catching about this is the Wales jawbones that form an arch over the staircase. And these have been a source of fascination for myself personally for many years. They are absolutely huge, and you only, when you're up close to them, do you get some idea of the scale. And this is a jawbone of a whale. Incredible. Inside the People's Palace, there is a mock-up of what would have been an old Glasgow tenement kitchen. And this is a photograph showing it. And it's got the old cast iron range. And that was used as a way of heating the room, warming the room, cooking on top, and a little oven there where you could also bake or make stews or casseroles. You see the chamber pot there to the right-hand side, and you've got all sorts of other stuff. The OXO tin on the shelf on the left, and it's just quite a nice mock-up of what a kitchen would have looked like in a tenement. It was quite a sparse existence, but people were able to do quite a lot with the space. And at the back, you see the recessed or set-in bed where people would sleep. This is the same view, but slightly looking towards the other side. And there you had a cupboard, which was sometimes called a press in a tenement. You called it a press. In there, you would have kept some tin food and dry foods. And hanging on the door of the press is a carpet beater. That was your Hoover of the day, or your vax machine, or whatever you wanted to call it. That would be used. The carpets would be taken down into the back court, draped over a rope, and then the dust would be whacked out them with the carpet beater. It was an altogether different lifestyle. And just above the carpet beater, you can see clothes hanging, and that's on a pulley, which was a way of drying clothes in a house, in a room and kitchen. It was a pulley screwed onto the ceiling that could be used to dry the bedding. This is a display in the palace, and it is of a different kind of house. It's a model of a prefab. And prefabs were prefabricated houses, as the name suggests, and they became popular just after the war, where there was a huge requirement for quick and economic housing as the population boomed. And prefabs was part of the answer. And they were manufactured in factories and bolted, assembled together on site. And they were incredibly cold in the winter and could be quite hot in the summer. Some prefabs still remain, but they've subsequently had brick skins added to them and insulation, and they're altogether quite cosy now. But this again is the People's Palace, showing the social history of Glasgow, and that really is its true purpose, is to show the people's history of the city of Glasgow. This is another exhibit within the city, and it is a stall from a wash house, and it shows where the women could go into a local wash house, book a stall, and have unlimited hot water, and they could get all the laundry done. And it's a lovely little mock-up in the People's Palace showing that. And you can even see it's got the wringer there for drying, squeezing the water out the washing. And I think I can see the washing board and some tongs to lift out garments from boiling water. It was a hard existence, but it's good that the People's Palace has been able to preserve an example of that for us. Within the exhibits is also a mock shop, which has been called the Buttercup Theory, and that allows people to go in and see what like the old-fashioned shops were, and it's really been put together in marvellous detail. First thing that's quite striking about it is the glass in the frontage and the beautiful lead work above the display area. You see the glass there at the top. It's absolutely tremendous, intricate detail of glass, and the eggs and all the exhibits down on the shop frontage, and gives us an idea of what they were like. Today we shop in supermarkets where we can get everything. We can get groceries, we can get fruit, vegetables, fish, dairy products, all under the one roof. But back in the day, all these shops would have been separate shops, and the Glasgow housewife would go from one shop to another, gathering the essentials for the dinner for that evening. This is an example of a wartime relic, and this is called an Anderson shelter. It was named after a minister, one of the government ministers who sponsored the idea. And these were placed in gardens or back courts of houses, predominantly gardens. And this was a shelter where, when the air raid sirens sounded, the families would decant into the air raid shelter and stay there. It gave them some protection from flying debris. The only thing it wouldn't have prevented was a direct hit, which was quite an astronomical chance, to be fair. A lot of tenement people went to shelters in places like Glasgow Green, where they would walk across the bridge and go into these shelters, which were under the surface of Glasgow Green. But this is the Anderson shelter. You can see the sandbags around it and some good exhibits with information to read up on how these things worked and how effective they were. Staying on the war theme, these are examples of gas masks. The population was issued with gas masks, which they carried about in little haversacks, and they even had gas masks for children, which were, if you've seen photographs of them, they were made to look like Mickey Mouse, and they were one of the most frightening things I've ever seen. And I'm sure some of the kids felt frightened having to wear them. Fortunately, they were never worn in anger during the Second World War in the homelands. So, but they were a precaution that was there to protect the population. Here we see in the People's Palace a reference to John Maclean's desk. This is John Maclean's desk. There's a guy standing beside it. And John Maclean was a radical socialist, and he was very much part of the whole Red Clydeside movement. He was from Pollokshaws, and he was a firebrand in the movement of socialism, workers' rights, and the like. And he was assembled in Glasgow Green along with other speakers. And here we see his desk, very much as he'd left it, with all the lovely little writing bureau, with all the little drawers and papers and ink wells and such what. But a real piece of socialist history for which Glasgow was well known at that time. This is another firebrand. This was James Keir Hardie, a bust of James Keir Hardie, who was the founder of the Labour Party. And Keir Hardie was born out near Holly. Let me get this. Sorry, he was born out near Brannock in Lanarkshire, and there's the statue of him by Bernard Schnolz. And he again is another tie back to the firebrand Red Clydeside history. This is a plaque that's an exhibit, and it's from the Barrowland Ballroom, and this relates to the business that was started by Maggie McIver and her husband James, and they started the Barras business in 1921, and in 1934 they built a ballroom, a dance hall. Again, this is Glasgow's a love affair with anything that's American. Unfortunately, the ballroom was destroyed by fire in August 1958, completely to the ground, and it was then rebuilt by the family in 1960. And the rebuild is the current Barrowland that stands today, and it's such an important part of entertainment and social life in Glasgow. Many couples met at the Barrowland and went on to marry, and some others met in the Barrowland and didn't marry. But it was a very popular dance hall, and again, Glasgow had a lot of dance halls. And here we see this plaque acknowledging Barrowland. Contained within the People's Palace, there's also an exhibit of Duke Street Prison, where there is the bell from the prison, which was rung whenever somebody was going to get hung. And hangings took place there between 1865 and 1928. And in 1923, the last woman to be hung in Scotland was hung in Duke Street Prison. It was a woman called Susan Newell, and she was hung there in 1923. After 1928, the executions in Scotland, or in the Glasgow area, sorry, took place over at Barlinnie, up at Ridley. This is an exhibit, one of the sort of travelling exhibits that comes in and out of the People's Palace and other museums owned by Glasgow City Council. And this one appeared a couple of years ago, and this was the exhibit for Benny Lynch. Benny Lynch was a Gorbals-born boxer who went on to win the world title. And this is some of the exhibits showing gloves, trophies, magazine articles, belts, and it did the rounds around the Glasgow Museum circuit for a couple of years, and it was a well-loved acknowledgement of Benny Lynch, who was a Glasgow hero. This is a plaque that's for possibly the strangest thing, and it was the People's Palace had a cat called Smudge, and it was there from about 1970 through to 2000 or thereabouts, and it was officially adopted as a member of staff, which was quite unusual, and it was actually given full membership of the GMB union. Now, Smudge the cat, in its later life, was taken by the former curator of the People's Palace, and she kept it until it sadly died. But it had a member of staff that was a cat, and a union-carrying member at that. Here we see an aerial shot looking from the southwest up towards the People's Palace and the Winter Gardens. And the Winter Gardens were constructed by Boyds of Paisley, a company who were steelworkers. And it was alleged that the People's Palace was a copy of the upturned bow of Nelson's Victory ship. But I don't know if that's just a good pub story or whether that's accurate. Here we see the inside of the Winter Gardens in more recent times, where this space is now used as a cafe and meeting place, and it's extremely popular. Unfortunately, at the moment, as I'm doing this, the recording, the People's Palace remains shut, and it's my sincerest wish that it does reopen again, because it's a marvellous place and it's a marvellous area and space to visit. And there's the frontage of the People's Palace. We saw this is in a bit better detail from the first clip, and you can see the beautiful architecture. You can see the statue, the stonework. It really is a very, very pretty building. And of course, in the modern day, it's now accessible friendly for disabled with ramps, so anybody can get into the People's Palace and enjoy it, which is the way it should be. And together with the Dalton Fountain sitting out front, it really has become the focal point of Glasgow Green. It's the place where virtually everybody starts their journey in Glasgow Green. You start at the People's Palace and you go from there. And it's a wonderful pairing of the palace and the Dalton Fountain out front. And lastly, one of the most popular exhibits in the People's Palace is none other than Billy Connolly's banana boot wellies, which are in a display cabinet, and they hold pride of place for the People's Palace. This is us only scratching the surface of the People's Palace. It's an amazing building to visit, and if you get the opportunity, please do so. But we hope you have enjoyed this little trip, and it's perked your interest to go and see the People's Palace. Thank you very much.